Hey, how's it going? I'm just gonna try and be quick about this. Try to explain things along the way, but I don't want this video to be any longer than it has to. When you're buying a new car, test drive it, test drive the shit out of it. Don't be an asshole and take somebody's car over a joyride. Sometimes they'll have stipulations like, hey, you have to have cash in hand. I had one where I was at a parking lot. And I was like, hey, do you mind if I just drive it around the parking lot? It gave me a lot of info just to be able to turn on the car and have a feel for it. One of the first things you want to check is when you open the switch, make sure your check engine light and your airbag light comes on, and when you do turn on the car, make sure they come off. Now that one's going to blink for a little bit longer, and there you go. Right? Make sure that the brake light turns off as well. Now I have the e-brake on here because I'm at a little bit of a slope, but I know it does turn off. Make sure other lights don't stay on. And that's the bargaining chip. That doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to buy the car anymore. Test drive it. I need this car to be cold because I'm going to do the wheel bearings and a oil change. I got it warm enough, but I don't want it to get too hot. So I know that the wheel bearings are bad. When I test drove this car, that was one thing. Now, depending on what you want out of a car, well, let's do this. Oil. Smell it. If it doesn't smell like burnt oil and it smells like gasoline or coolant, need I say more? Make sure that this car doesn't have caked on grease there. Now, one thing is that this isn't wet caked on grease, it's just caked on grease. And we got a little bit of rust here. That was a red flag for me. So we kind of kept looking over the whole car. Everything else seemed to be okay. It was just mainly these little parts right here that got rust. Another thing to do is make sure things line up. This doesn't line up, but it wasn't a deal breaker for me, but it might be a deal breaker for me, or for you, I'm sorry. And especially depending on how much money you're about to spend on the car. When I drove the car, the clutch is bad as well. I noticed that right away. Make sure all your panels line up. Make sure it should all look good. Like when you look at a panel and you see too much of a gap, you've seen cars before, any car before. They all tend to have the same amount of gap. It's not like some of them have an inch gap and some of them have like an eighth of an inch. So as long as everything seems okay, like I said, right here, right off the bat, you can tell that this is, you can't see, but you can tell that it's raised a little bit on the hood. So again, an accident that I'm not really worried about. Make sure in the back, and look at that. I come here and the car comes from Wisconsin. I knew it didn't come from the valley, but all in all, everything lines up well. One thing I was told when I was first starting to get into cars is check the tailpipe, make sure it's not completely disgusting there. Check your brakes, make sure that your rotors don't look like they've been overheated. There's not big scorch marks on them. Score marks on them. Tires, I mean, I'm planning on getting rims for this car, so I'm not worried. Overall, one of the big selling points for the car was the sunroof, and that it is power locks and windows from the factory. Other than that, it's a little bit shabby, but it's okay. I like it. I'm having fun with it. Nothing that I can't do a little magic on and for the most part fix myself. Now, if you don't have that kind of level of knowledge of cars, don't buy a car like this. Wait until something nicer comes up. It is an '09. That was another selling point for me versus being an '08, '07. Or I wasn't even looking at '06, '05. So with all that, those are a few things you can look for when buying a car. If your check engine light, I just gotta emphasize that because my sister-in-law bought a car that way. If your check engine light doesn't come on, dump the car. They are hiding something awful. So dump the car, get out of there, and move on. Sometimes they'll remove it, they'll put tape on it. Sometimes they'll They'll literally punch it out. Sometimes they'll cut the wire. I had a Camaro that they cut the wire here, and that was naive me, not paying attention to that. Of course, when you're buying a car, especially when it's going to be a fun car, you lose all common sense and you make mistakes like that. I made that mistake. So hopefully this helps you out next time you're trying to buy a new car or a new used car.